All right, well, welcome to session 4, everyone, of the Empowering Literacy Building a Collaborative Approach in British Columbia. It is so nice to have everybody here, and I'm really astonished that we are continuing to get people enrolling and attending, because I'm very aware that it's June the 12th. And I'm not sure if you're new to joining, but I was definitely suffering the last few weeks with COVID, and I'm almost recovered from that. I hope that I won't have any more coughing, but my voice is definitely back, so that is good. So before we go any further, though, I do want to recognize with gratitude and respect that we are on the unceded shared traditional territories across British Columbia, on whose lands we live, work, and play. And I am coming to you from the traditional and unceded and ancestral territory of the Secwepemc speaking peoples, and here in Williams Lake, home of the Williams Lake First Nation. All right, so this evening we have a very full agenda on one of my favorite topics. The first thing we are going to do is tell you a little bit about us. We will review our purpose and our goals. We will do some knowledge building around multi-tiered system of supports. And we will then have a breakout discussion activity for you, and then a panel discussion, and we'll be joined by representatives from Cowichan School District 79 tonight. And then, of course, we've got one more prize, so stick around to the end. So if you are new to joining us tonight, or if you just love hearing me tell you all about Dyslexia Canada, I'm happy to keep doing it. Dyslexia Canada is a national charity committed to ensuring that every child in Canada with dyslexia receives fair and equitable education. We advocate for evidence-based practices and policies to be implemented within the public education system to ensure that every child receives the instruction and support they need to succeed with literacy. So if you don't know who I am, I'm Melanie Berg. I'm a licensed school psychologist and also a BC certified teacher and senior instructor in the School of Education at UNBC. And I'm joined by Alicia Smith, who is the Executive Director of Dyslexia Canada. So the purpose and goals of this workshop series is to connect educators who are interested in improving equity in literacy outcomes across BC. And I've mentioned before that if we improve literacy outcomes, we're actually improving equity in multiple other areas as well. So it is very, very much a worthwhile cause to learn about. We're here to celebrate success as well. We have educators all across BC that are doing amazing things, and this is a chance for everyone to connect and to identify common challenges and share strategies for overcoming barriers. It isn't all sunshine and rainbows, unfortunately. We do have some hurdles that we're still working on. And we want to empower educators in BC to lead change within their sphere of influence, whatever that influence may be, whatever role they may have. And we want to help Dyslexia Canada understand the needs of BC educators to inform their advocacy. So it's a tall order, but we are committed. So what do we know so far? We like to start out with a bit of good news. So we ended up with over 600 people registered for these workshops. Most are BC educators. Some are, a lot are teachers, and we have a few parents in there as well. And since the videos have been posted, the first 3 are up on YouTube already on Dyslexia Canada's channel. We have over 875 viewings combined of those videos. So that is pretty phenomenal, pretty impressive. We're pretty happy about that. So hopefully we can see that number continue. Now, we do also like to own sort of the reality that we're dealing with as well. So a little bit of a challenge. So we've asked in the survey that was a part of signing up for this series, how are the assessment data you are collecting being used? And so this is what the survey told us. This is the information. So at the student level, we have the majority, that's how assessments are being used primarily in British Columbia, to look at what's going on with the individual student. So 69%. 55% said it's being used at the class level. So that might be to look at what's going on within a classroom, how you might organize supports or organize your day at the classroom level. And then the grade level, we've got 12%. So we know that we have some schools across the province. We're going to hear from hear from a district today where some schools are looking at what's going on at the grade level and thinking about how they can coordinate and restructure those supports and and what might be needed at various grade levels. And then at the school level, we've got about 20%. So that's very similar to the grade level, looking at across the school, how can you reorganize, how can you use the people to make the most of the time and the resources that you have. And then it was pretty low for district level. So that's an area that we're hoping that we can see some shifts across the province as people learn more and more about MTSS and effective assessment practices. Always a silver lining. So the not so great news, what barriers have you faced? So this is what you told us about the challenges that you have in your individual schools and in your districts. So number one, and these are not necessarily in ranked orders, this is just the top few that came out. So number one of them was the lack of resources, lack of classroom resources. So having access to materials that you can use and not having to recreate the wheel and invent everything from scratch. Number two is leadership, lack of knowledge or lack of direction and around literacy and effective literacy practices. Number three was quality of training, both initial and ongoing Pro-D. So there were very, very clear indications from a lot of the people that filled out the survey that their initial teacher education and then professional development or advanced education that they did beyond that really was lacking in terms of helping them to understand effective literacy instruction. And then time for training and resource creation. I remember from one of our previous sessions, I think it was 90% of people were learning on their own dime and their own time in this space. So time definitely was a barrier that came up in this question for sure. And number five is lack of consistency in approach. So having various different beliefs or approaches to how to address literacy issues. That was a theme that came up as well. And requirement to submit leveled reading assessment data. There was a lot of teachers that indicated that they are being asked to do those leveled assessments, but many were moving on and using evidence-based assessments as well. But it's very time consuming to have to do those leveled reading assessments for sure. And then philosophical disagreement, and that can really cause a lot of stress in the workplace when you feel like you can't talk about what you're doing, or when you feel that you're making strides, but there's no support. All of those different things, philosophical disagreements can be a real challenge in the workplace for sure. So that was the top 7. So now we've got a question for you. I'm going to turn it over to Alicia to set this up.
Great, thanks. So again, we're going to use the Mentimeter because we have so much fun with that. So if you can scan the code that's on the screen now, or go to menti.com and enter the code that you see on the screen, we can start answering the questions in today's Mentimeter. And I'm just going to share that so you can see it. Here we go. So our first question is around priorities for change. So as Melanie said, we went through the survey and we looked at the various things that were included in the survey. And we picked out the themes that kept coming up over and over and over again. But we would really like to give you a chance to sort of rank these in terms of priority for you. So, oops. Actually, maybe this is not the first one. There we go. Barriers to change. This is the first one. Sorry. We have 3 questions today. So starting with question 1 is the barriers to change. So as we said, we went through and looked at the barriers that were indicated in the survey. And we'd like all of you now to, using the Mentimeter tool, to indicate whether you disagree or strongly disagree or agree if this is a barrier for you. So sort of ranking this from 1 to 10, how big of a deal is this for you in terms of barriers that you have experienced in trying to move your practices forward and trying to shift within your sphere of influence towards structured literacy and updated assessment practices? Oh, this is great. It's Great to see it starting to move there. We'll just give it a minute for everyone just to have a chance to answer. So it's really looking like leadership knowledge and lack of consistency seem to really be taking the lead here. This is quite fun. It's kind of like a little bit of a horse race. With
an unfortunate horse race, but a horse race.
Unfortunate horse race, it's true. When I was reading through the survey results about lack of consistency, just to speak to that for a moment, there were a lot of things that were mentioned under this category. So there was a lot of discussion here about a lack of clarity around curriculum expectations, about how they can be interpreted differently by different people. There was a big discussion about how students coming into a class, especially when you get into grade 2, 3, and up, where there's been a huge difference in what those kids are coming in with based on what was happening the year before, if teachers have different approaches. So that was certainly interesting to read the stories about that. The time for training and planning was definitely one as well. That was a big piece, a lot of stories in there about having to do that training, as Melanie said, on your own time in the evening, like you are here tonight. But also a lot of stories about having to spend hours like photocopying things and putting together your own packets because you haven't been provided with decodable books or with the resources that you need in the classroom. So there's certainly the classroom resources piece, but then there's also the time for that. So moving on to the next question. Are the priorities for change, which I realize I started on this slide when I meant to start on the other slide. So we're kind of coming back to this, but I'll come back to this one and give everyone who didn't have a chance to order these. This is a ranking, so you can slide the different items up and down, ranking with your first, the most important priority to you, to the lowest. And we recognize that all 7 of these things are very, very important. But if you were the, supreme ruler of BC education and you were able to change things, what would you do first? What would you make as your top priority and kind of rank them down from there? So that's great. We're seeing things move around a little bit. Curriculum is sliding up. I like that. Changes to professional development. Currently, we've got mandating universal screening using evidence-based tools in first place. Put knowledgeable leaders committed to evidence-based practices in charge. I like that one. Yeah, that was a big theme coming out. And I should say as well, these priorities were pulled out of the very last question in the survey. The last question of the survey, if you recall, was, if you could make one change to education in BC, what would you change? So again, we analyzed those results, grouped them into themes, and sort of summarized them here and took the top 7. And again, recognizing these are all very, very important things, but really it's a where do we start? So we'll give this another second for people to jump in and participate.
It's interesting that the knowledgeable leaders is hanging on. We're going to hear from 2 very knowledgeable leaders this evening. So
yeah,
that's quite fitting.
Yeah, and curriculum and screening keeps going back and forth. They keep flipping positions, which I feel that because, it's a chicken and an egg sort of thing. Sometimes which one do we start with? Do we do the curriculum or do we do the screening to show that there's a need to do the curriculum? Both very important, but I definitely see those flipping back and forth. But I would agree, put knowledgeable leaders committed to evidence-based practices in charge. Yes, I would agree that would be a great place to start. So thank you, everybody, for participating in that. And I wanted to end on a hopeful note. So I did add one more question in, which I don't know that Melanie's seen this because I threw it in at the last minute. Oh, look at all the thumbs up. That's great. Love it. So our last question is, what do you feel hopeful will change in BC as we continue to work together? So personally, I feel like we are at the sort of tipping point in British Columbia. We've got a lot of wind in our sails. There have been the government announcement. We had the premier here to visit us. We had the Minister of Education here to visit us. We have 600 plus educators who've registered for this series. As we said before, we've got 3,000 that are on the Science of Reading Facebook group. So there's a lot of momentum. There's a lot of momentum for change. So I wonder what you think, or where you're feeling hopeful, and where do you think that we will be going in the next year or 2 in British Columbia? So lots on assessment, which is great. I think that's with the announcements of screening, our discussion last week of how we can use assessment to help to improve equity and outcomes for kids. Collaboration is popping up. I love that.
Changes in
Consistency.
higher ed and teacher training I see in there too.
Oh, collaboration's getting bigger. Yes.
Mm.
I think that is so key, right? Like for so long, we've had so many silos, and getting everyone together to take this on in a collaborative way, to share data, to do it as Melanie said many times, no shame and blame, just train. That's really what we need to get to. Oh, that's beautiful. Universal screening, assessment, collaboration, and curriculum change popping up there. So thank you for that, everyone. We'll just give it one more second. I see there's a couple more people to respond. Fantastic. Okay, and back to you, Melanie. Let me just get back to the presentation. Thank you for participating in that, everyone.
Yes, and I just glanced down and see that we're up to 98 participants. I'm just like, I'm absolutely stunned. It's June. I'm just so impressed with everyone. And I know there are a lot of people that just literally, they just can't be here. And that's reflected in the views of the recordings. I'm absolutely blown away by how many people have viewed them and are continuing to view them. So hopefully that it can be a catalyst, right, for learning throughout the summer and beyond. So I think that's great. So learning, knowledge building. Oh, before I forget, now that I'm a little bit more on my game and not feeling so that flu fog that I had, I did put in the chat, if you happen to be on social media and you want to share this out, we're going with the hashtag LitBC 2024. So if you want to share that out, take any screenshots, share things that sound really good to you or interesting or light you up, feel free to do so. Okay, so just a quick recap. This is the fourth session of this series. We started out with an overview of the science of reading, what it is and what it isn't. And then we moved into a discussion on the second session about structured literacy, again, what it is and what it isn't. We talked a lot about the misconceptions of those two things, and there is a lot of really unfortunate narratives out there that are trying to sort of pigeonhole and make it sound like this is about having kids being structured, right? Structured literacy is about really how we deliver it, and it's that scope and sequence, but it isn't about wanting to restrict kids or to limit the types of things that they're learning about. It's wanting to make sure that everybody's getting what they need and that we're making the decisions that we're making rooted in scientific understandings and evidence. So really that's what it's all about. You do not lose the art of teaching. You do not lose that ability to connect with kids and to have really positive relationships with kids and to look at kids holistically. All of those things are really, really important for teachers and for educators, and we don't lose any of that when we're talking about these approaches. And so the third piece of the puzzle is multi-tiered systems of support or multi-tiered system of supports. I've heard it said both ways because it's multiple systems, but it's also multiple supports. So you're going to see it written in two different ways this evening. So we talked about MTSS a little bit in the last session, and that was really all about assessment. So let's move on to our recap from last time, and then we will dive into MTSS for tonight. So last time we talked about assessment, and we looked at the different aspects of a really strong assessment system that helps you to be data driven when you are thinking about servicing kids and making sure that they get what they need. So it begins with universal screening. This is applied to everybody, and it helps to answer the question of who needs support. You can't provide the support if you don't flag who's at risk in the first place. And once you identify those who are at risk, you move into diagnostic assessment. So what should that support be? It helps you drill down and really uncover what is going on for that individual student so that you can guide your instruction. So we talk about testing kids, but what we're doing is we are assessing student needs. The assessment information is for us. It's not about labeling kids or pigeonholing them and putting them in certain levels. It's about letting us know what that child needs or what that student needs in terms of their instruction so that they can make the most amount of progress in the shortest amount of time. So that's what the diagnostic assessment is about. And then we have to do progress monitoring, because the progress monitoring lets us know if what we are doing is working. So that's what we talked about last time. And if you missed that session, you can certainly go back and watch it. And so all of that assessment happens in this framework of multi-tiered systems of support, or multi-tiered system of supports. And why do we need this system? Well, it's really about prevention. It's about resource allocation, research-based instruction for all, and equitable access. And one of the key things, the way that I like to think about it, and I think it was Lynn Stone where I first heard this analogy, I could be wrong, I've heard multiple people say it, but it's not mine, and I don't want to take credit for what's not mine. But the analogy is so fitting. It's really about like putting a fence at the top of the cliff rather than sending an ambulance to the bottom. We know that some kids are at risk, and the idea of preventing them from developing problems that they don't necessarily even have to have in reading is really where the power of MTSS comes in. So prevention, resource allocation, research-based instruction for all, and equitable access. That's why we want to think about this at a systems level. So what is that system? What does it mean? What is MTSS? So it's really a framework, and it started out, it kind of, when I first learned about it, it was coming from two different aspects. We had this thing, and people of a certain generation, I'm totally dating myself, those of you who have been in education for a couple of decades or more will remember hearing about effective behavior support or positive behavior support. That was one aspect of MTSS. And then we also heard about RTI, response to intervention or response to instruction. And what that is, MTSS really is the umbrella for both of those things. So it's really how we provide effective academic and behavioral supports to allow all children to succeed. So it's a framework for thinking about how we deliver supports. It's rooted in evidence-based instructional practices in tiered implementation. It's database decision-making, collaborative problem solving, teams and shared relationship, and school-wide assessment system. So before we move on from this slide, I want to give a little bit of a history and an analogy to help people really understand what is meant by this, because it kind of, when we think about effective behavior support and RTI, it kind of sounds like, oh, it's just another one of those things that, you know, it comes and goes and it's a fad. Neither of those things were fad. I worked at fads. I worked in schools implementing both aspects of MTSS, the behavior and the academic, and it can have really, really powerful results for students, and it's really empowering for teachers as well. So I do think it's important to understand that MTSS comes from the healthcare field. It's long been recognized that preventative actions we can take to reduce the risk of several health concerns and the related consequences, and costly things like treatment. If we can reduce the risk in healthcare, and we can apply that same kind of thinking to education. There's a human and an economic cost to being reactive rather than proactive. And MTSS is all about being proactive. So in the health model, when we're thinking about providing tiered supports, it begins with thinking about primary care. What can we do when we think about, you know, having a flu, for example? Let's talk about that, considering that I was just sick. We know at the primary level what we do for everyone. We can advise and we can educate the importance of washing hands and why we need to make sure that we wash our hands in a certain way with, you know, warm enough water with soap for a certain amount of time. And when we cough, we want to make sure we're covering our mouth when we cough. When we're sick, we stay home. All of those things everybody can do, and it's good for everyone. It benefits everyone. So when we do that, we can use the data that we have in a public health system to get some type of understanding around, even if we do those things, we know that some people will continue to be at risk. They're a higher risk to develop the flu, for example. So for those people who work in public education, who work in healthcare, who have compromised immune systems, we might want to provide a second level of prevention, an increased dose of something, and that could be in the form of a vaccine. So for those people, who are more at risk, we want to provide a vaccine. And that's the secondary or tier 2 level. The third level in the healthcare model would be those people who continue to get sick or they have complications from that flu. So something like pneumonia. So when you have pneumonia, you often, many people often need to see a doctor or go to the hospital, have some kind of extra care, depending on the other factors that are going on for them. They need more specialized treatment and they need more knowledgeable people to help them to be able to cope with that. So when we think about systems, it's not that we have, oh, these kids are tier 1 and these kids are tier 2. It's the need that they have that qualifies for, that tells you whether or not that level of support that they need. So to relate that to the education system, we're talking about literacy primarily tonight, but you could apply this to any aspect where a child is struggling. If we have a universal screener, that's something we do at tier 1, using evidence-based practices that are rooted in scientific understandings of literacy and learning. Those are things that are good for everybody. And if we make sure that we are screening everyone and we are using really effective practices, we're going to shrink the risk. We're going to minimize the number of people who have to go on, who may need to go on to have additional supports. So if you do identify students that need additional supports, you've done your universal screening and you can recognize that this proportion of students is going to need additional support, then you can do more diagnostic screening. And that's kind of like the vaccination. You're checking and you're digging deeper to find out what's going on, and you're providing instruction based on what you find out. So you're digging a little bit deeper. Some of those students, so you've got 4 to 5 students that all responded really well to that intervention that you provided at tier 2, and it's in addition to what you've done. Like the people who get the flu don't stop doing the things that they were doing in tier 1, even though they've been vaccinated, right? We want to keep adding to that. So all the good tier 1 instruction is happening, and you're getting an extra dose in tier 2. So 4 to 5 students are struggling in that, are successful in that area. You have 1 student that's not, that student's going to go on to tier 3. They're going to get even more support. So it's not that these students will physically go to this place and these students physically go to this place. Sometimes it might be somewhere different. Sometimes it might be push in. Sometimes it might be extra adults coming in or differentiating your instruction. The whole way along, this instruction is differentiated. So when we're thinking about MTSS, we really have to get away from this idea that it's a response to it's a need to figure out what kind of kids we have and slot them into places. That's not what MTSS is. You don't need a school psychology assessment or some type of special referral in order to get tier 1 or tier 3 service and supports. What you need is data to drive those decisions behind you providing those supports to the students who need them. So that's really what MTSS is in a nutshell, but we're going to dive into there's a question in the chat. Where can we learn more about MTSS? There's a fantastic podcast that dives into this. It's the Melissa and Lori Love Literacy podcast, and it's a particular episode that was pretty recent with Stephanie Stoller. And a lot of this, she's just a master. I always say Stephanie Stoller is who I want to be when I grow up. She's amazing. And she just has such a phenomenal way of explaining these things. She is a school psychologist, a teacher educator, and just has an excellent way of explaining this information. So starting with that podcast is a great place. And then she's got Reading Science Academy that has individual courses on. It's got lots of great information. It's like a membership, and you can join and access all kinds of recordings and support for things. But she does have a particular course on MTSS. We also have there's lots of books and different tools out there. Our prize may or may not be related to MTSS tonight. So we can definitely throw some links and information for those of you that want to dive in and learn a bit more about it. And I would highly recommend that. I refer to MTSS as the secret sauce of what makes structured literacy work. So it's really important to have that information and that background of how this all fits together. And the history of MTSS, applying that health model to education, came out of a necessity around recognizing that the system wasn't working. We have really overloaded tier 2 and tier 3, and we don't have enough speech and language pathologists, psychologists, special educators. We often, I get asked that question, will this student qualify for supports? We should be providing supports whether somebody qualifies or not. In an MTSS system, it allows you to do that. There's no wait to fail in MTSS. So you will see triangles. Those of you who are of a certain vintage like me, you will remember the RTI triangles or the positive behavior supports triangles. There's triangles involved in this as well. But it's really important to recognize that this is not, again, this is not about sectioning students. This isn't meaning that 80% of your students are going to be at tier 1 and they are going to be successful. 15% are going to need tier 2 and 5% are going to need tier 3. That's not what this is saying at all. What it is saying is that if you have really good tier 1 instruction that's rooted in evidence and it's providing the instruction that students need, we can expect that you would hope that you're going to have about 80%. If you have less than 80% of your students achieving with good tier 1 instruction, what's going to happen is your tier 2 and your tier 3 are going to get overloaded. And that's exactly what we see happening in British Columbia. It's what prompted me down this road that I'm on right now. So it's really, really important to understand how these tiers work and to recognize that tier 1 does not mean that everybody is getting the same thing all the time in the general classroom. Tier 1 means instruction is very, very differentiated, but it means that every student is getting that, it has that same expectation that they are going to be successful. And they are provided with the supports that they need in the classroom, but it could be highly differentiated and should be highly differentiated depending on the students that are in front of you. And how do you know what to differentiate? That's what you use your data for. That's where you're deciding that. The students that are continuing to struggle, those are the ones that you're going to provide more intensive supports at tier 2 and tier 3. What else can I tell you about this? I have a lot of stuff in this one, but I don't want to take up all the time because I know we've got our panelists and they are going to talk about this as well. So let's talk about equity. What does this have to do with equity? In our current system, as I mentioned, students in need of support are typically referred by their teacher, for example, to a school-based team meeting, right? And then the school-based team will decide if the difficulties are significant enough that it warrants a psychoeducational assessment. Often that's the process. And there's different supports, and not to say that there isn't other things happening in between as well. There definitely is. For a lot of students and a lot of schools, that's how they set up. But often the next step is that referral. So the students continuing to struggle, they must have a learning disability. Let's refer them for a psychoeducational assessment to see what's going on. So access to support with our current system in British Columbia, we have a designation system. It hinges on psychoeducational assessments, but these, as we know, are often very slow. We have massive shortages and really, really long wait lists. And often what the referrals really are a symptom of systems, of things not working at the tier 1 level. And so that's where we need to think about how can we use our data to understand what's going on at the systemic level as well. So economically advantaged families who can often access evaluation and support externally, they are the ones that this is where we see this stratification of our public education system. And we see those who can afford private tutoring, private assessments, those children will move on and continue to access support and maybe get additional supports that other students don't have access to. And so if we're not meeting the needs of students, of all students within our public education system, it really becomes inequitable. So using an MTSS model helps us to ensure that our system is as equitable as it can be for all of our students. So as I mentioned, MTSS is the secret sauce. We definitely want to be trying to implement it as much as we can. So a key piece of MTSS is collaborative problem solving. And collaborative problem solving really is an effective model, an effective model within MTSS because it really helps us to understand what to do with the data that we collect. It's all fine and well to have good assessments and to collect that data, but if we're not doing anything with it, you may as well not collect it. It's really, really critical to make sure that we are using that data to direct our instruction, to change our instruction, and to change the way that we are operating our systems. We don't want screening to be a compliance activity. A lot of the time when we do assessments, and I see this and I hear it from teachers in schools, is that they have to do these assessments. They're required to do these assessments, but they don't actually feel like they get anything out of them in terms of informing their instruction. And that's really unfortunate. Universal screening is not about checking off a box. It is about making sure that you've got the right data to make decisions so that you can make sure your system is running as effectively as you can. So in the collaborative problem solving model, it's a cycle of steps that teams take in order to enact change. It's a structured way of thinking that helps teams make decisions based on the data that they do collect. So in the first step, the problem is defined as the difference between what is expected and what is seen. Problems are seen in the context of changeable factors, especially instruction, and these problems are often apparent based on universal screening data. And in the second part of the problem analysis is why is it happening? This allows for clarification about why the problem is happening, so an action can be developed. It might involve clarifying a problem through diagnostic assessment or consideration of other system factors. And then the third is plan development. So what do we do about it? Once we've identified the problem, we know why it's happening. What are we going to do about it? So you have to look at the resources, the tools that you have in your building and decide what the next step is going to be. You enact that plan and then you evaluate it. Is it working? If it's not working, why? Was it done to fidelity? And fidelity is one of those things where when you're implementing a program or a type of instruction, we want to try to adhere to it as much as we can, but sometimes it can be really difficult to implement things with fidelity when you have real live human beings in front of you. Students get sick. They may miss multiple days. That may be a part of why the instruction hasn't happened. So normally if something is going to take 3 weeks, it may need 4 or 5. So you have to, again, use your data and continue to evaluate. So if it isn't working, then you go back to step 1. What is the problem? What's going on? And then you drill down for each issue that you are trying to understand. So collaborative problem solving is the backbone of the shared leadership and teamwork seen at multiple levels of an MTSS framework. Leadership teams at the board, school, grade, and student level need to be considered and often have a role depending on what it is that you're looking at. Different teams work at different levels of the system and use different assessments to support this purpose, but they all use the collaborative problem solving process. And note that this process can and should be used not only at the individual student level, but also at the systems level. When district leaders and school leaders think in this type of problem solving model, it really helps to identify who's at risk, which schools are at risk, and what kinds of supports are needed. Is it curriculum supports? Is it instructional, other types of instructional support? Is it human resource supports? What are the issues that are going on? If you don't identify the problem, you really kind get to the root of the issue and address it. So collaborative problem solving is a key piece. So diving in a little bit deeper into that, we'll look at just a few here with in terms of the students. So this is thinking, if you're looking at this as a case study, this is first of all, identifying what is the problem. So we've got a student in grade 4, and the screening indicates that the student is reading 40 words correct per minute, and the benchmark is 90 words correct per minute. So there's a gap of 50 words per minute. Accuracy is 92 and benchmark is 96. So that's the problem. The student is not at benchmark. They're underachieving. They're significantly below in accuracy and automaticity. Those are two very, very clear indicators of ongoing reading difficulty unless you intervene, right? So that those are some of the things that we identified that as those crucial essential skills that we need to be identifying. So the second part, problem analysis. Why is this happening? What is going on for the student? So using the existing data and then doing additional diagnostic assessments. So remember, diagnostic assessments are not psychoeducational assessments. They are user-friendly, often non-standardized, teacher-administered, or specialist in your school, learning support teacher, doing those diagnostic assessments. And they need to consider the curriculum and instruction factors and the student factors. So when we look at this level, it's really actually really difficult to make a clear, honest diagnosis of a specific learning disorder in reading or dyslexia, because often the curriculum and instruction factors, we don't often see that a student has had enough intensive and consistent evidence-based practice instruction. But then they get referred before they've had that. We know that ruling out opportunity to learn or not having the opportunity to learn is one of the diagnostic factors. So can you really say that a student has had the opportunity to learn if they've received instruction that isn't evidence-based, or based on what we understand about how the most effective ways to teach reading and writing? So, and then student factors, they have to be a part of that as well too. So at this point, you're forming a hypothesis. Though this is occurring because X, right? Student is having difficulty with accuracy because they have not mastered phonemic awareness, or they're still struggling with phonemic awareness. So whatever the issue is that your data is guiding you, then you're going to move on to step 3. Step 3 is plan development. So what do we do about it? So we want to make a plan. That was quick. We want to find out who is involved, what will they do, and when will they do it. So this may or may not be a specialist teacher and the student going to the specialist, or it may, I have a little visitor. It may be sorry, I'm distracted by my in-laws dog that just oh, and I was going for the cat food. Okay, Alicia, can you take over the rest of the slide? I'm gonna get my little guest out of here.
Sure, no problem.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry.
So at this phase, it's important to make the plan and to formalize the plan. So writing the plan down in some way, shape, or form so that everybody understands who's involved in delivering the solution. What is the plan? What are we going to do? If, in the example was phonemic awareness. So we're going to provide some instruction for that. Who is going to provide that instruction? When is that going to happen? And as Melanie said, it doesn't necessarily need to be pull-out instruction. This could be this student is going to participate in a small group within the classroom. We're going to deliver this instruction 3 times a week for the next X number of weeks. And it's going to happen in the classroom, but really defining who is doing it, when is it happening, where is it happening, for how long is it happening, so that there is a formal plan in place before you move on to step 4, which is evaluating the plan.
And I'm back. Thank you.
And you're back.
I identified the problem. The small dog came through the cat door and proceeded to eat the cat food. So yes, we had to have a solution for that problem. Oh my goodness, this is the reality, right? This is life. Okay. All right, so problem solving, step 4, is it working? So this is where we want to be doing progress monitoring. We want to be checking using a lot of those same probes that we did for universal screening. And again, what is our assessment data? What are we collecting to monitor student progress? What is that data telling us? How often do we need to do that? The more frequent or the more intense your intervention, the more often you want to be progress monitoring. So what supports do teachers need if it's not working? And then we go back to step 1. Okay, so what is going on? And then we reevaluate and move on from there. So at the systems level, we can use the exact same model. What red flags indicate that a problem exists? So if you've got 83% of the students in a grade that do not meet the minimum level of established benchmark for a certain task, that is going to be a flag for you. If 83%, so we talk often when we talk about RTI or MTSS, we have that reverse triangle. again, that's sort of thinking about you're thinking about where the students are struggling, but really that's an indicator that the system is at risk. So something is going on in the system, and how do we differentiate, or what is going to be needed in order to turn that number around? So if you've got a significant number of students who are not meeting the threshold for foundational skills, what are you going to do about it? So you've identified the problem. And then you go into, why is this happening? What is going on? So sometimes it is the instruction, the materials, the resources, the knowledge base that staff have. They don't have the right tools in order to address the issues of the students in front of them. So again, this isn't about blaming anybody. It's certainly not about blaming the students, and it's not about blaming the teachers, but it's about having the right tools and resources to be able to address the problem that's at hand. So it can be very, very difficult to look at a situation where you've got 83% of your students not achieving when you do a universal screening. And sometimes there was resistance to universal screening because there's a perception that if you have 83% of your students not meeting and you identify that somehow that's shaming the children or shaming the teacher, but you can't move the needle on the problem if you don't address what it is. And so we have to just let go of any blame and let go of any shame, understand what the problem is, and make sure teachers have the right tools and that students have the opportunity to respond to those tools. So once we identify, is it a system issue? We come up with a hypothesis, then we move to plan development. What are we going to do about it? So who's involved? What will they do and when will they do it? What is needed? And we're really at this point when we're looking at systems in British Columbia, we're recognizing that our assessment tools have been problematic. They aren't giving us the information that we need. So as a system, our government Ministry of Education has stepped up and said, we do need some evidence-based tools. This is how we're going to try and support that. We don't necessarily have all the answers yet in terms of who's involved and what will they do and when will they do it, but hopefully that will come. But when you're looking at this at the school level or at the classroom level, it could be something like a teacher is out of their element. Maybe they're teaching in a primary grade and they've never taught in a primary grade. Maybe they're working on a letter of permission and teaching and being with children. They don't have a whole lot of experience. How are you going to support that? How are you going to ensure that teacher is able to build capacity and the students are able to get what they need, right? Those are the realities that we have in British Columbia, and not acknowledging the problem isn't going to help us address it. And then moving on to number 4, is it working? What assessment data are you collecting to monitor student progress, and how often? And so again, you're gathering, even though you're talking about the system level, the data that you're gathering is about the students, but you're looking at it across a system rather than at the individual student. So what supports do teachers need if it's not working? And again, we go back to the problem solving model and back to step 1. So within MTSS, it is, I know it's in front of me. Within MTSS, collaborative problem solving happens at all levels, and that can't be emphasized enough. We have tended mostly to focus on the student level. And that makes sense. Of course, we would be focusing on the student if the students are struggling, or we're using that data to make decisions. It is definitely going to impact the student. But when we take that data and we look at it across grades, across schools, across districts, and even provincially, K-12, and in our Ministry of Post-Secondary Education and Future Skills, if we can align all what we are doing and think of it as in this collaborative problem solving model within a multi-tiered systems of supports system, that is going to help us to be able to move towards equity for all students. If we've got a common framework or common frameworks for understanding literacy development and learning that are based on evidence across our education system, it is going to be much easier to do effective implementation of MTSS. And remember, again, MTSS is about prevention. So there is an initial cost to these things, and in terms of getting everybody on the same page and understanding the knowledge base that's required to do this, getting everybody with the tools, making sure that we've got effective assessment tools in place. these things do have a cost, but really this is about prevention. The cost of not doing this goes far beyond the K to 12 system. It extends into public health, into mental health, into unemployment, into all of these factors that we know are highly correlated with low literacy. So when we're thinking about the big picture and the global impact of why MTSS is important and why aligning our knowledge base across our entire system is so powerful, that's the crux of this. This is why this is equity work. And when we're thinking about social justice issues and having a big impact and the impact of education in its role in equity, that is, to me, this is the crux of it. And this is why I'm so passionate about MTSS as much as I am about literacy and structured literacy. MTSS is a big piece of that, and it really is the secret sauce. So I would encourage everyone to continue learning more about it, and we'll post some resources in the show notes and in the document as well that goes out with this. All right, so we are at the point where it is time for our group activity. So we're going to go into breakout rooms. And again, please don't be shy. If you need to step away, make sure you come back and join us for the discussion after, but the breakout rooms will be automatically assigned. Please introduce yourself. We encourage cameras to be on to promote dialogue. Open the Google folder. There's a link in the chat, and choose the Google Doc with your room number. You'll have 20 minutes for discussion and response. And everyone is encouraged to record at least one response on the Google Doc. So remember your group norms and make sure you give space, but also feel most welcome to contribute your thoughts as well. Okay, and we'll let you get into groups. And we'll see you in 20 minutes. All right. I think we got just about everybody back. So we're gonna, sorry to cut your discussion time a little bit short. But I went a little bit long, of course, getting all passionate about MTSS. So we're gonna jump into our panel tonight, and want to give the most amount of time that we can to our special guest, Darlene Reynolds, Assistant Superintendent, and Amy Loudon, Coordinator of Student Achievement from Cowichan School District 79. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
So we're going to start out with the usual question. If you can just tell us a little bit about your district, where are you located, and a little bit about your demographics.
Okay, I'm Isquale McQuaid. Good day, everyone. I've been trying to practice good evening, but I'm not quite ready to do that publicly. So we mentioned earlier, I'm Darlene Reynolds, Assistant Superintendent from the beautiful Cowichan Valley, home of the Cowichan people. And in fact, we actually have in our very large geographic district 7 nations that we are proud to work with in serving our learners. So in our district, which spans from the Chemainus area all the way towards Victoria, up around the Cobble Hill, Shawnigan Lake. I'm not sure if any of these sound familiar to any of you, out to Lake Cowichan in here in the Duncan area. So we have 17 elementary schools, 5 secondary schools, approximately 1,200 employees serve our learners, and about 8,600 learners here in our district. So a little bit, here's an interesting fact. We have 3 unions that we work with. That always gives a little bit of context about the work that we're doing. Our district also give you a little bit more background of why we're where we're at in our literacy journey. We celebrate that we have about 95% of our students participating in FSAs, and we understand all of the complexities that come with FSAs, but we do recognize that that gives us a bit of a data and tells a bit of our district story, which unfortunately hasn't been a celebration for us the last few years. The gap between our district student achievement in literacy and numeracy and our provincial is quite wide. We, for example, know that about 46% of our grade 4 learners are on track or extending in literacy. And that is results that our superintendent has said will not continue to happen on her watch. So we are very fortunate in our district that we have senior leadership that is committed to our district's North Star of equitable outcomes. And that's really allowed us and empowered to do some of our work here in the Cowichan Valley.
That is amazing. That's again, speaks to that importance of recognizing the data for what it is so that you can identify the problem and move forward. So kudos to your district and to the leadership team for taking that on. So you're in the scope of that. One of the reasons I was really excited when you agreed to come and join us this evening is because I looked very thoroughly at your literacy framework, and you very directly reference MTSS and also the science of reading and a lot of these models that we've been talking about, Scarborough's rope and the simple view of reading and all of the things that go along with structured literacy. Can you tell us about what prompted the changes that you've made that resulted in that literacy framework, and how is it different from what you were doing before?
Amy, is it okay if I'll take the first half of the story and then I'll let you take the second half?
Sounds good.
So Amy is, I'm very proud to say that Amy is one of my very first hires when I joined the district. She joined us as a literacy coordinator, and now she's a coordinator of student achievement. So I get to take credit for Amy. But a little bit about why we got started. As I mentioned, our student achievement data and how our district became very committed to that work. So while we had senior leadership and trustees that were really looking, okay, what do we need to do differently to address the needs of our learners? We also had a group of teachers, like I've heard in many of the other districts and even in the breakout group of teachers who were exploring, recognizing that what they're doing isn't meeting the needs of learners and trying to identify what strategies and supports they can do. And so when you have that momentum occurring on both sides for us, it allowed us to really come together and say, what do we need to do to help us as a district be unified in meeting the needs of these learners, and knowing that individually, if you're in a school trying to solve this problem, if you're in a classroom trying to solve this problem, it's not going to be effective. And we all feel like we're overwhelmed with trying to identify what those needs are. So I also happened to just come to the district at this time with a background in, I like how you mentioned earlier, response to intervention. That's one of those things that'll kind of date us a bit. So I came to the district with a really deep background with response to intervention and teaching of reading. So brought the teams together and recognized that we developed the literacy framework. We also had really ground swelling of teachers who were very dissatisfied with the current assessment practices. And so one of my first tasks is I got to meet with a team of teachers chosen by our union groups to talk to them about what they were doing with assessment and what they needed to do, what would prefer to do. And I remember at that first meeting, I think we literally had an almost divorce from our teachers from the previous assessments. And they didn't feel that it was meeting their needs. They felt it was a checkbox. I'm going in a little bit into Amy's response, so I hope she can pick up with a dovetail here in a second. And we talked about assessments. And I remember at that moment, one of the kindergarten teachers said that she looked at me and she's like, Darlene, I think this is ridiculous. Why are we doing these assessments? Our kids can't pass them anyway. And I don't want to do things our kids fail. And it was one of those moments like that gut check. And so we had very deep conversations around how these assessments are designed to help us understand our learners' truth so we can come alongside and fill the gaps. And that kind of was part of that beginning part of our story. And Amy, I'm sorry if I went into part of your answer.
That's totally okay. And it's actually good. So as Darlene kind of mentioned, there was some dissatisfaction with the previous assessments that we were using. And so moving forward, having a common set of data that helps identify learning needs and that drives instruction to help students become confident and skilled readers was such an important focus. Also equally important is having those resources that are instrumental in helping this become a widespread and purposeful movement. One other point that I think is really important is we were hearing from a lot of intermediate teachers that there was this new recognition that many of the kids coming to them were just not skilled readers. This was, alarming for some of those teachers, and lots of questions around that began to surface. I think that's kind of all I have for there. Darlene, do you want me to kind of keep going?
I think you're great. Does that kind of cover most of what you were
Yeah.
asking, or do you want us to go deeper on any of those parts?
I think one other key point would just be that like having myself and my coordinator colleagues moving in to a few focus-based schools and then spreading out into other schools as the years go by has been really, really helpful as well.
Yeah.
Oh, that was an echo.
It's becoming it's funny that was an echo, because it is a bit of an echo. Like I'm hearing this from more and more people, that dissatisfaction with the assessments that we've had available, and a recognition that when you're presenting students with these passages that they can't read and they're so long and they have to kind of push through. And it's not that, when you're doing a universal screener, sometimes kids will be presented with things that are hard, but they're so quick, and it's not, you don't continue on, right? If they can't do it, there's those stop points that are built in. So, and it helps you, really does drill down and help you to identify what's going on so that you can get to that next level and do more diagnostics. So how is it going now that you've implemented, it's been, I think your framework came out, remind me, year before last?
At the beginning of last year, we
Yeah.
launched the framework. The beginning of last year, we did a sort of a soft launch of our reading assessments.
Mhm.
And what those, I mentioned that assessment committee that we began working with that divorced the former assessments, that when we did that former assessment, we'd get something like 35% of your students aren't on track. What do you do with that as a teacher? What do you do with that as an administrator? So with our coordinators and our teachers, we designed these universal screeners that check on students' progress, kindergarten through grade 9. So last year was our sort of soft launch of that. Everybody tried it. Everybody had their data dashboards with real-time data for their learning needs. And I think we've definitely got a lot of success stories that Amy's going to be able to tell you about. But I think what's been really powerful is hearing both administrators in our district and our teachers doing this work and having conversation. I think Amy has a little bit more of that real-time street data, because she gets to be in schools that's getting to see it come to life.
Yeah, and we are seeing lots of positive results. So there's a few different models that teachers are trying in different schools in our district as we work through the new learning around all of our foundational literacy skills, and using assessments to guide our tier 1, 2, and 3 instruction decisions. And this is happening in the primary, intermediate, and secondary grades, which is really exciting. One example in one school is it started with 2 grade 4 teachers who collaborated to group their students together to learn skills needed to close gaps in their reading. They used the district dashboard data to group their students in both classes according to the skills that needed to be strengthened. During this process, they were able to utilize district support, work with us coordinators. They continued to assess, dig deeper when they needed to. They revisited the data throughout the year, sometimes just with them and sometimes again with some support from the district. These groups were all differentiated. There was new learning. For example, both teachers used UFly for those kiddos that needed work around emergent literacy skills, and they also collaborated additional literacy programming for students who had stronger literacy skills already. Groupings were fluid. Additional tier 1 literacy instruction was also happening in both classrooms. And the greatest thing is that these teachers are now so comfortable sharing all of their successes with their colleagues. This is so powerful, and it really is encouraging other teachers who are eager but maybe not entirely sure where to start. We have other examples with similar models in other schools, similar kind of groupings, but not quite the same either, which is also great. Not everything works the same for every class and every school. So it's really great to kind of share and then see what other options are. These are just kind of a few that I'm highlighting, but I really do foresee this growing. Teachers are excited, kids are reading, the enthusiasm is really spreading. It's really positive. And not only are we seeing significant results for students and teachers, but we're also hearing from parents, which is really, really great. And I'll just really quickly go through a few observations that I've noticed from different schools that I'm working with. We're seeing increases in student confidence. Every student is going to a group to learn what they need. So they're more confident, they're more willing to buy in. We're seeing that it doesn't even necessarily matter if they're working with their own classroom teacher. They are happy to go to a neighboring classroom if that's what is needed to learn the skills that they're working on. Learning groups are designed to teach targeted skills, and students are beginning to recognize the skills that their skills are growing, and they're also recognizing their own strengths and stretches, which is helping them advocate for themselves. And we're actually seeing that happen, which is amazing. Students are sharing their success. They're excited about their progress. We're hearing this every day. For example, a couple statements that we've heard students in one of my focus schools say, I feel safe in my literacy group. I can read bigger words. I am proud of myself. Like, these are just amazing statements to hear from our students. And just a few quick teacher perspectives that I've heard from some colleagues in different schools. There seems to be a real growing willingness to step out of comfort zones and try new things. And that's a big thing for us as teachers. It's hard to try new things and step away from things that we've always done. But it's really important, and it's leading to changes in models of classroom instruction and assessment practices. Teachers are working together collaboratively. They're feeling empowered about new learning around research and evidence-based practices, as well as around administering new screeners and interpreting that data to inform their tier 1, 2, and 3 instruction decision. And that's really big.
Huge,
Our dashboard, sorry, I'm going to go on for just a tiny bit longer.
Yeah, no, go for it.
Our dashboard inventories, that's what's showing student strengths and needs. They are being embraced by teachers. It's absolutely phenomenal. It's really helpful when we can see at a glance skills that need to be taught whole class, or skills that may have been mastered no longer need to be a focus. Even when we're looking at that data and we're seeing that students are still not as developed as we would hope in that skill area, we're still seeing growth there. And we as teachers need to see that. Even if they're not at that benchmark goal, they are making progress, and this data is showing us that, and that's really, really important. And just a few powerful quotes that I've heard from teachers directly in different schools. I no longer feel like I'm triaging. I now feel like I'm teaching. I feel like I know my students better than I ever thought I did. I am seeing far less behaviors. That's a biggie. Kids are really, truly buying in. These aren't just my kids, these are our kids. And that's really powerful stuff. And I will stop there because that was a lot.
No, that's so great. And everything you're saying, I think we had a glimpse into that with Erica Roberts, who joined us in the second session. And she spoke, about a lot of those changes. And what I'm hearing really strongly through what both of you are saying is really, it isn't just about giving the teachers, the tools and the knowledge. It's the systems working together. Like, I'm really hearing those levels of MTSS. And that there's been a focus on making sure that this isn't just falling on the shoulders of, oh, here's a new assessment, here's a new resource teacher, you go and you learn and you figure out how to do this. It's collaborating and classrooms working together and administrators understanding it. It's the whole big scope, and that's the secret sauce. So I love it. I think it's fantastic. I do want to ask you, what is coming up next. But before I do that, somebody shot me a really great question that if you feel comfortable asking or answering, that's great. If not, that's okay. But I'm very curious to know, are there conversations about your success that you're having? Or is there an avenue for you to showcase this at like superintendents meetings and those so other administrators can kind of get a glimpse of the changes and the impact it's having?
I have to admit, I'm a relatively new assistant superintendent, and we have been busy doing this work at home and bringing it to life. So we are hopeful that we'll have a chance to tell the story again in the future. I have had an opportunity at our Islands Superintendent Associations meetings to sit with other directors and assistant soups and sort of show them our framework. And I know it will be shocking to all of you that even in those settings, we are having philosophical conversations about the growth and change that needs to occur with literacy instruction in our province. So I usually come out with a few, I joke and say that I wear long sleeves because I've got some battle scars of doing this work in a few places. And it is about having really sometimes tough conversations, but circling back to the power of this work for it impacting learners. Amy mentioned that what her observations in schools have been. I've had the opportunity to sit at our board meetings where our trustees are hearing stories from our schools and hear our principals and teachers and students celebrate this and show their data. Like they're showing their school data in a way that doesn't break confidentiality, by the way, but shows where we're at. It's our truth. And the progress learners that are made is that growth mindset, which I know is a word that we've used for the past decade or so, but it really is looking at what our students need next. And Amy mentioned that she works with focus schools. It's because at the district level, we're able to stand on the balcony and see that some schools have more needs than others. And so we target resources there in response to that. So we, even as a system, reflect MTSS and the work that we're doing with our actual schools as well.
It's fantastic. And the other thing that comes to mind when you think about, these big slogans or, growth mindset and different things that we tend to say, what I hear and what I love about MTSS and this framework of structured literacy and what we've learned from the science of reading, this big collection of research over the past 50 years is that we can get almost all kids to proficiency in reading. And this really is the epitome of presuming competence. If we're coming from a place where we presume that all of our students can get there, and if they aren't, we're using that collaborative problem solving model to dig deep to figure out why. And sometimes it's systemic, sometimes it's our tools, sometimes it's something else that's going on, but you're still coming from the place just because it's the opposite of deficit model thinking, right? If you presume that everybody can get there and you address the issues as they come up to help every student get there, you will see results. And that's you're showing that, and it's fantastic. So we are at 8:32. What's coming up next for your district? What are you working on next? What are you excited about?
Well, Amy and I chatted about this in the office today, and I said, I'm going to have to be really honest. We're really excited that we're going to stay the course, that we're going to keep doing this work in a real, authentic, meaningful way. Our coordinators go into classrooms with teachers and look at their data and help them identify resources and tools and strategies. We're continuing to work with our administrators to make sure they understand their important role in this work. So we're being very attentive to not looking for the next shiny thing and to just keep deepening our knowledge and our implementation. But there is also a numeracy framework that's being launched with screening tools as well, but not losing not taking our eyes off the literacy work. We're just learning more about what our students need, what we need to do to support our intermediate teachers, our primary teachers. So we're doing that work. I have to throw in one more thing because I know we've got to go, but you mentioned the secret sauce. When I did this work as a school-based administrator and as well as in my work at the district role, It really has helped when I wrapped us around the word, thinking about this through a cultural lens, your school culture, an instructional lens, what are the good, important instructional practices we have, and an awareness of the structural impacts. So the work that Amy was talking about comes to life best when our school administrators can step back and look at those structural spaces to give room to bring this to life, because what she described is a structure that actually allows tier 2, tier 3 enrichment all to occur at the same time, and no one teacher carry that load by themselves.
Love it. Yes, love it. Love it all. It's all fantastic. And thank you so much, both of you, for joining us tonight. Again, it's very, very much appreciated. And I think, you know, the people that are doing this work, where it hasn't been done before, you're the trailblazers. So this is, you're one of the few districts that will be looking to and watching to see what's going on. And I hope you do get the platform to share your stories. A little bit more about the progress, and sharing this series is a good start. I mean, lots of people will hear it, right? If we can start here and build from this point. So kudos to you both. Thank you so much. We are at the time where we want to do our prize draw. So have we got a name?
Tonight for our prize, we have a fantastic book, Untangling Database Decision Making, a problem-solving model to enhance MTSS. Congratulations.
Congratulations.
And thank you, everyone, for joining us for this series. And I want to especially thank Melanie for all of her time in preparing this and sticking through it, even though she had COVID for episodes 1, 2, 3, and 4. So thank you, Melanie. I really appreciate everyone who helped with the planning of this, and for all of you for coming out and joining it. And I hope that I know we will be actually offering more workshops and webinars and focus groups for BC educators in the coming year. So stay tuned, make sure you're on the Dyslexia Canada mailing list, and I hope that we will see you again. So thank you all for joining us.